My name is Caleb Mercer. Most folks called me Cal, and in 1944 I was a staff sergeant in the U.S. Army, Airborne Infantry. I'm going to start this the way it actually started for me, not the way the posters wanted it to start. It was the middle of the night over Normandy, and I was hanging upside down in a tree, my parachute snagged in the branches like a bad joke. My helmet had slid down over one eye. My rifle kept thumping my ribs every time the wind nudged me, and down below in the dark, a German soldier stopped under my tree and lit a cigarette. The match flared just a tiny orange bloom, long enough to show me his face, young, sharp cheekbones, tired eyes, and long enough for me to see how close he was, close enough that if I dropped wrong, I'd land practically in his lap. I remember thinking something real stupid. If I sneeze, I'm dead. Not for God and country, not victory or die, just that. He took a drag, exhaled, listened to the night like the night had secrets, and I tried to turn myself into wood and leaves and silence. That's the hook, I guess, if you need one. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't a clean hero story. It's a human one. It's fear and grit and luck, and the kind of love men don't know how to name until they've had to drag each other through mud. And since I'm still here telling it, you already know I didn't sneeze. But you don't know what it cost us to keep breathing after that. I grew up outside Fort Wayne, Indiana, in a town small enough that everyone knew your business before you did. My dad ran a machine shop, honest work, loud machines, hands that always smelled like oil. My mom could make a pot of stew feed an army, and in winter she'd keep it simmering like the house itself had a heartbeat. When the war started, it didn't feel like war. It felt like newspaper ink and radio voices. Europe sounded like a faraway argument. Names of places I couldn't point to on a map. Men in uniforms in black and white footage moving like they belonged to some other world. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and the whole country's face changed in a day. After that, everything became counting. Counting scrap drives, counting ration stamps, counting the boys who disappeared from school and came back in uniform on leave or didn't come back at all. I wasn't the first to enlist. I waited, not because I was brave, not because I was scared, because my dad needed help in the shop and I told myself I could do my part by keeping the machines running. Then a letter came from my cousin Walt, already overseas. His handwriting looked like it was done on a moving truck. The letter had jokes in it, but they were the kind of jokes that sounded like a man whistling past a graveyard. He wrote, "Cal, you ever wonder what it sounds like when the sky is coming apart?" That line followed me around like a stray dog. I'd be cutting metal in the shop, and suddenly I'd hear it in my head, the sky coming apart. 2 weeks later, I got on a bus with a paper bag lunch, and my mother's eyes on me like she was trying to memorize my face. My dad didn't say much. He shook my hand and held it too long, then let go like it hurt him. My mother hugged me and said, "Write, even if it's only 2 lines." "I will," I promised. And I did, but there were plenty of times later where I wanted to write and couldn't find words that wouldn't scare her to death. Basic training took everything familiar about me and stripped it down to something simpler. They shaved our heads. They yelled until yelling sounded normal. They taught us how to march like we were part of a single animal. Then they offered Airbornes. You have to understand, back then, Airborne had a shine to it. It was danger you volunteered for. It was a kind of pride men could wear. I signed up partly because I wanted to prove something, and partly because if I was going to fight, I wanted to be where it mattered. Airborne school taught us 2 big truths. 1, your body can do more than your mind wants to believe. 2, the ground always wins. The first time I stood in the doorway of that training tower, looking down, my stomach tried to crawl up into my throat and hide. The instructor yelled, "Go," like the word itself was a shove. I jumped. The harness bit me, the chute snapped, and for a second, swinging under that canopy, with the wind loud in my ears, I felt not fearless, but alive in a sharp, bright way. When I hit the ground, I rolled wrong, popped up, and tried to act like I meant to do it. That's where I met Eugene, Red Malloy. He had hair the color of a match flame and a grin that made you think he'd never had a serious thought in his life, which was unfair, because he had plenty. He just hated giving fear any room to sit down. He drifted in sideways on his jump, slammed into the dirt, and when he stood up, he dusted himself off and said, "You see that? That was style." I said that was gravity. He laughed like we'd been friends forever. Some men do that. They make the world feel less heavy just by standing next to you. Our squad leader was Sergeant Frank Pritchard, thick neck, shovel jaw, eyes calm as a pond. He didn't waste words. If you did something right, he gave you nothing. If you did something wrong, he gave you a look that made you want to fix your whole life. Our medic was Harold Doc Benton. He'd been studying dentistry before the Army grabbed him. We teased him about it. Doc would say, "Laugh all you want. When you're missing half your teeth, you'll come crawling." Red told him, "Doc, if I'm missing half my teeth, it means I'm still alive, and that's already a win." Doc was the kind of man who smiled easy, but his hands were serious, steady, careful, like they were built for keeping people attached to this world. We trained until we stopped being boys with hometowns and became men who could move on instinct. We ran until our lungs felt scraped raw. We crawled through mud under live fire, so we'd learn what bullets actually sounded like, how they cracked overhead like someone snapping boards. At night, when the yelling stopped and the world got quiet, we talked about home like it was a place from a dream. Red talked about a girl named Mara like she was a promise the war couldn't touch. Doc talked about his mom's porch swing and the smell of lilacs in summer. Pritchard didn't talk much. Once, Red asked him what he missed. Pritchard said, "Quiet." We shipped to England and waited in a kind of tense boredom that I didn't know was possible. We played cards. We wrote letters. We cleaned weapons that were already clean because having something to do with your hands kept your mind from chewing on itself. Then one night, the officers gathered us and told us we were going in. Not soon, not maybe. In. The airfield smelled like fuel and wet grass and sweat. The planes sat in rows like dark animals. Men lined up, checking gear in silence that felt too tight. Red nudged me and said, "You think the French have good coffee?" I said, "I think the French have bigger problems than coffee." Doc checked his medical kit for the 10th time, lips moving like he was counting without sound. Pritchard walked the line, eyes on faces, like he was trying to lock each one into memory. Inside the plane it was loud enough to make thinking feel pointless. The engine noise wasn't just sound, it was pressure. The red jump light glowed like a warning. Men prayed, men joked, men stared at nothing. Then we hit turbulence and the plane shuddered and somebody yelled, and suddenly the dark outside started flashing with little bursts like angry stars. Anti-aircraft fire. The sky wasn't coming apart yet, but it was cracking. The red light stayed on, minutes stretched, my mouth went dry. Then the green light snapped on, and the jumpmaster started shouting, and the line of men stood up as one. You hook up, you check the man in front of you, you slap his shoulder, he slaps yours, a chain of small touches that says, "I'm here, you're here, we're doing this." The door opened and cold air punched me in the face. And then I stepped into nothing. There's a moment after you jump where the world goes strangely quiet inside your head, like your brain can't decide whether this is real, and then the chute snaps open, and everything becomes slow and loud. Below me, Normandy looked like a black patchwork quilt. Fires burned in the distance. Tracers stitched the ground. Searchlights reached up like fingers trying to grab us. And right away, I could tell we were scattered. The drop went bad. Wind, flak, pilots dodging fire. Whatever the reason, we were landing all over creation. I drifted, trying to steer, trying to make sense of hedgerows and fields and dark shapes that might be barns or might be something worse. Then I hit the tree. Branches snapped, the chute tangled, my harness bit into my thighs. I swung, upside down for a moment, then sideways, then settled into a miserable hang like a fish on a line. And then I heard boots on the ground. Footsteps close. I froze so hard my muscles cramped. That's when the German soldier stopped under my tree and lit his cigarette. The match flared. My heart hammered so hard I was sure he could hear it. I had my knife in my hand. I could cut myself free and drop, fast and loud. I could try to land on him, or I could cut free and hit the ground and hope I could shoot first. Or I could stay still and pray he walked away. He smoked, looked around, listened. Then somewhere off in the distance, there was a shout, German, I think, and he flicked the cigarette away and moved on. When his footsteps faded, I realized I'd been holding my breath so long my vision had started to pinch in at the edges. I cut myself down as quietly as I could. I hit the ground wrong, rolled, and pain shot up my ankle like lightning. I bit down on a curse and crawled into a ditch, mud cold against my face, trying to remember the rules. Find your unit, do your mission. If you can't do either, make trouble. I moved through hedgerows like a thief, listening for voices. Every sound felt like a trap. Then a whisper snapped out of the dark, password. I froze, rifle up. I whispered the answer. A shape rose from the ditch. Red's freckled face appeared, grinning like he'd found $5 on the ground. Cals, he breathed, man, you look like you got in a fight with a whole tree. I almost laughed, almost. My throat wouldn't cooperate. Doc appeared behind him, eyes wide. You hits. Ankles mad, I said. Everything else is mostly pride. Then Pritchard slid into view, calm as ever. He looked us over like we were equipment. How many we got? He asked. 4, Red said, plus you makes 5. We're missing most of the world. Pritchard nodded once. All right, he said, we're a squad today. That's how it starts in real life, not with a trumpet, with a handful of men in a ditch deciding they still belong to each other. We started moving toward what we believed was our objective, a road junction that mattered because it fed the German defenses facing the beaches. The big plan was already shredded by wind and flak, but the needs on the ground didn't care about the plan. We ran into our first German patrol near a low stone wall. It happened fast, quiet, then sudden. Voices, a flashlight flicker, a helmet silhouette. Pritchard froze us with a raised hand. We held still, breath trapped. A German soldier turned and saw us, maybe a glint off metal, maybe a shape, just enough. His rifle started to come up. And the night tore open. We fired, they fired back. Stone chipped, dirt jumped. The sound was huge, too close, like the war had crawled inside our ears. I remember my hands moving the way training taught them. Aim, squeeze, shift. When it ended abruptly. 2 Germans lay still. One moaned in the dirt. One ran into the dark. For a second I just stood there, trying to accept that I pointed my rifle at a man and changed his life, or ended it within a heartbeat. Doc moved immediately, kneeling by the wounded German. I hissed, Doc, we don't have time. Doc looked up at me and his face wasn't angry. It was disappointed, like I'd forgotten something basic. He's bleeding, he said. So Doc tied off an enemy soldier's wound in the dark, under threat, because bleeding didn't care what uniform you wore. I didn't understand that kind of courage yet. I thought courage was charging a gun nest. Doc's courage was kneeling down anyway. We kept moving. We linked up with a few other scattered paratroopers from different sticks. No officer, no clean chain of command, just men with weapons and a sense of direction. We hit the junction in a messy little fight that worked mostly because the Germans were confused too. Grenades, quick rushes, yelling, the smell of cordite mixing with damp earth. At one point, a machine gun opened from a farmhouse window and pinned us, bullets cutting the air like scissors. Pritchard didn't hesitate. He grabbed 2 men and flanked, moving low and quick like he'd done it 100 times. They tossed a grenade through the window. The gun stopped. We held the junction by dawn, and when the sun came up, it did it like it wasn't impressed. Pale light over smoke, birds starting to sing like the world hadn't been shattered all night. That's when I saw French civilians for the first time. A woman stood in a doorway holding a child. She watched us the way you watch a storm, careful, waiting to see what kind it is. Red, exhausted and filthy, raised his hand and said softly, "Bonjour." The woman blinked. The child lifted a small hand and waved. and something loosened in my chest. Not joy, not relief, just a reminder that this wasn't a map exercise. People lived inside these fields and roads. We fought through the hedgerows for days that blurred into each other, green walls, hidden ditches, sudden gunfire. The hedgerows weren't just plants, they were fortresses. Each field was its own little war. We lost men, we gained replacements. Names came and went. A kid named Lenny Price from Ohio got hit by a sniper and dropped without a sound, the bullet taking his voice like it was nothing. Doc crawled to him anyway. I grabbed Doc's belt and whispered, "He's gone." Doc didn't look back. "Then I'll bring him home," he said. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of my life. Not because it sounded good, because it was stubborn love in a place that tried to kill love first. By the time we pushed out of Normandy, I felt older than my own father. My ankle never stopped aching, and the skin under my gear stayed bruised from straps and crawling and carrying. We went back to England for a short rest. Rest is a funny word. You eat hot food, sleep in a bed, and still wake up sweating because your body doesn't believe the quiet. Then came new orders. Holland. Operation Market Garden. The briefing made it sound like a clever shortcut to end the war early. Airborne takes bridges, armor races up, Germany cracks. Simple. War loves punishing simple plans. We flew in daylight. That should have been easier. It was. Daylight just meant the enemy could see us clearly. As we approached, I saw flak bursts like black flowers in the sky. I saw planes trailing smoke. I saw parachutes blooming and drifting, and in a few cases, not blooming at all. The green light came on. We jumped. Dropping in daylight feels like being on a stage with 1,000 eyes. You hang there, slow, helpless, and any man with a rifle can draw a bead on you if he's got time. I hit the ground hard, rolled, came up running. The Dutch countryside was beautiful in a way that felt like an insult. Canals, neat farmhouses, trees lining roads like someone had designed peace on purpose. Then gunfire snapped overhead, and beauty ducked for cover like everything else. We fought for roads and bridges and towns whose names I still pronounce wrong. We cleared houses room by room, dust, shouting, splintered wood, the sharp smell of plaster. In one house we found a family hiding under the stairs. A mother, a father, 2 kids. The kids didn't cry. They stared like crying had gotten old. Red pulled a chocolate bar from his pocket, one he'd been saving like it was treasure, and broke it in half, offering a piece to the older child. The kid didn't reach. The mother whispered something in Dutch, eyes on our rifles. Doc knelt, smiling softly, and said, "It's okay." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. The kid finally took the chocolate like it might explode. Artillery hit down the street, and the house shook. The family flinched like it was normal. That's what occupation does. It trains people to accept the unthinkable as routine. Market Garden turned into a slow grind and then a pullback. Bridges held too long, armor stalled, Germans fighting like trapped animals. We did what we could. We bled for yards, and the war did not end by Christmas. We limped back into a colder world and tried to pretend we weren't tired. Then December came, and the Ardennes. The German offensive hit like a fist out of fog. One day the line felt steady, the next it was chaos, units cut off, roads jammed with trucks and men and rumors. We rode in open-bed trucks in freezing air that cut through wool like it was paper. Men huddled together, breath fogging, trying to keep hands from turning useless. Red leaned close and said, "You ever been this cold in your life?" I said once, I fell through ice fishing when I was 12. Red laughed, "You wins." Doc wasn't laughing. He was checking faces the way he checked wounds, like he could spot a man slipping toward panic or exhaustion. We ended up near Bastogne, the famous pocket, though it didn't feel famous at the time. It felt like being stuck in a fist with the fingers closing. Snow fell in slow, pretty flakes that looked like peace, until you remembered they were falling on men trying to kill each other. We dug foxholes in frozen ground. Shovels rang like they were hitting stone. Fingers went numb. Men cursed quietly because loud cursing wasted energy. Then the shelling started. Artillery in winter is a special kind of cruelty. Explosions throw snow and dirt into the air, and it comes down on you like the earth is burying you on purpose. We were cold, hungry, and short on ammo, and the Germans probed our lines at night like wolves testing a fence. One night we heard them close, snow crunching, whispers, a clink of metal. Pritchard raised a hand. We held our breaths. A grenade landed in the snow between our positions and rolled, quiet as a thought. For half a second nobody moved, like our brains couldn't accept it. Then Pritchard lunged, grabbed it, and threw. It exploded in the air, close enough that I felt heat slap my face. Then it was gunfire, shouting, shadows moving too close. Doc crawled along the line, low, trying to find who was hit, hands working in darkness like he could see with his fingertips. When it ended, the Germans pulled back, leaving bodies in the snow like punctuation. The quiet afterward was worse. Your ears rang, your breath sounded too loud. Your mind finally had room to think, and it filled that room with images you didn't invite. I looked at Pritchard and realized something. He wasn't fearless. He was disciplined. He was forcing fear into a corner and sitting on it. Red whispered, "You saved our asses." Pritchard didn't look at him. "Keep watching," he said. A few days later, the Germans demanded our surrender. We didn't see the paper, but the answer came down the line like a joke shared in church. Nuts. Men laughed, real laughter. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like we might actually live. Then the cold returned. The hunger returned. The fear returned. Doc got busier every day. Frostbite, trench foot, shrapnel, men collapsing from exhaustion. One morning, I found Doc sitting on an ammo crate, staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. I sat beside him. "You okay?" I asked. He blinked. "I'm fine." "You're not." He swallowed hard. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I feel like I'm bailing water with a spoon." I didn't have any wisdom. I just sat there, shoulder to shoulder, sharing warmth like it was rationed. When the weather cleared, our planes finally got through, dropping supplies. Little parachutes floated down like prayers answered. We ate, we loaded mags. We held the line until relief forces cracked the pocket. When we marched out past wrecked tanks and frozen bodies, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like stumbling away from a fire that almost took the whole house. After Bastogne, I stopped believing in neat endings. And I stopped believing the war had any mercy left to spend. So that's the first stretch, Normandy and Holland, and that frozen circle around Bastogne. If you're waiting for the story to turn clean, that's where a movie would end it. Men surviving, shaking hands, swell of music. But real life doesn't cut away when you've had enough. Real life says, "Get up, there's more." We pushed into Germany in 1945. The towns looked harder, like they'd been built to survive winter and war and disappointment. Civilians watched from doorways with faces that had decided not to show anything. We took surrenders. We fought pockets of resistance. Some German units folded. Others fought like men trying to hold back the tide with their hands. One day we came upon a group of German soldiers trying to surrender, white cloth on a rifle, hands raised, faces gray with exhaustion. They weren't the clean, sharp soldiers from propaganda pictures. They looked like hungry men who wanted the world to stop. Red aimed his rifle anyway, jaw tight. Pritchard raised a hand. "Hold," he said. One of the Germans spoke a little English. "No more," he said. "No more war." Doc stepped forward cautiously. "Drop your weapons," he said, slow and clear. They did. For a moment it was quiet enough that I heard wind moving through bare branches. Then a single shot cracked from somewhere behind us. One of the surrendering Germans jerked and fell like the ground had grabbed him. Everything exploded, men diving for cover, rifles coming up, shouting. My heart slammed like it wanted out. I spun, looking for the shooter. It was one of ours, a terrified, exhausted replacement from another platoon who saw movement and panicked. His sergeant grabbed him and shook him. The kid's face was white, eyes huge, like he couldn't believe his own hands. The remaining Germans dropped to their knees, hands high, fear pouring off them. Red looked like he wanted to kill somebody, maybe the kid, maybe the Germans, maybe the whole war. Pritchard walked to the dead German, stared down, then looked at the trembling kid. In a voice so calm it was scarier than yelling, Pritchard said, "You don't get to do that again." The kid nodded hard, tears freezing on his cheeks. That night, Red said, "You ever think about how close we are to doing something unforgivable?" Doc answered without looking up, "Every day. There's a myth that good men go to war and stay good because they're good. The truth is uglier. You stay decent because you keep choosing it, even when you're tired of choosing." A week later, we were ordered to clear a wooded area near a camp. We thought it was an enemy prison camp or labor site. Rumors flew faster than official words. We approached carefully, weapons ready, senses stretched thin. There wasn't much of a fight. A few guards surrendered, a few ran. It felt almost too easy. Then we walked through the gate, and the world turned inside out. I'm going to tell this part plainly, because dressing it up would be a lie. We found prisoners alive, barely, who looked like hunger given a human shape. Eyes too big, skin too tight, clothes hanging like scraps. The smell hit us like a wall, sickness, waste, something sweet and rotten underneath that I still can't fully name. A man stepped toward us, wobbling, and tried to speak. His voice was a whisper. He touched his own chest like he needed to prove he was real. Doc moved first, always Doc. He lowered his rifle and ran forward, shouting for water, for medics, for anyone with sense. Red stood frozen, mouth open, like his mind had tripped over something it couldn't step around. Pritchard's face changed in a way I'd never seen, like someone had broken a rule in the universe right in front of him. He whispered, "Jesus." That was all he had. We tried to help, but we didn't know enough. Our rations could hurt starving people if they ate too much. Water had to be given carefully. The right kind of help required doctors and supplies and systems. But in those first hours, we did what soldiers always do when they're faced with suffering. We used what we had. Red and I ran to nearby buildings and stole every blanket, coat, and piece of cloth we could find. We stripped extra layers off ourselves and handed them over. I watched Red take his own scarf and wrap it around a prisoner's shoulders. Red was shivering afterward, but he didn't seem to notice. Doc's hands never stopped moving, but his eyes looked haunted. He was trying to save everybody with that same old spoon. When proper medical teams arrived, they took over. We stepped back, and that's when the helplessness hit me, because up close you realize there are things bullets can't fix and bravery can't fix and willpower can't fix. That camp did something to us. After you see that, you don't just go back to normal, you carry it, quietly, forever. We moved on because the war was still moving, but none of us were the same shape inside. We fought again, towns, roads, crossroads, smaller fights now, but no less deadly. A machine gun in a farmhouse could still ruin your day. A single mortar round could still turn a letter into a telegram. In late April, we heard the rumor, then the confirmation, that Hitler was dead. Men reacted strangely. Some cheered, some shrugged, some looked empty. Red said, "So that's it." Doc said, "It's not going to feel like it, is it?" It didn't. Because even when the head is cut off, the body can twitch for a while. Then early May, it finally became official in our area: surrender. No big dramatic moment, no single clean silence. Just orders changing, enemy soldiers stacking weapons, officers doing paperwork like the most important thing in the world was a stamp. When we were told plainly that the war in Europe was over, I didn't feel fireworks. I felt a long exhale. Men sat down wherever they were and stared at the ground like they were seeing it for the first time. Red looked at me and said, "I don't know what to do with my hands." I told him, "Me neither." Doc sat on a step, staring into the middle distance like he was listening to something none of us could hear. Pritchard stood apart, looking over a field where wildflowers were starting to grow, and for the first time since I'd met him, his shoulders looked lighter. Not happy, just less burdened. That night somebody found alcohol, somebody found music, men laughed too loud, some cried, some danced badly with each other because there were no women around and it didn't matter. Red raised a cup and said, "Tamara," like he was afraid to say her name too loudly and scare the future away. I raised mine and said, "To everybody who didn't make it." It got quiet for a moment. Doc nodded once, eyes wet. Pritchard simply said, "Yeah." Later, when the noise died down, I walked outside alone. The night air was cool. Somewhere far away, a dog barked. The sky over Germany looked exactly like the sky over Indiana. Stars don't care what men do beneath them. I thought about the German soldier under that tree in Normandy, lighting his cigarette. I thought about Lenny Price falling without a sound. I thought about Doc crawling toward danger because the wounded don't get left behind, not in his world. And I thought about how the thing that kept me alive wasn't some grand idea. It was hands on straps. It was voices in the dark. It was men refusing to let each other go. You'd think this is where the story ends. But the last part, the part nobody puts in the recruiting posters, is what happens when you go home and find out you don't fit inside your own life the way you used to. After VE Day, we didn't go home right away. The Army kept us in Germany for occupation duties, guarding depots, collecting weapons, processing prisoners, helping displaced people find somewhere to go that wasn't a ditch. It was quiet work sometimes, and at first, quiet didn't feel peaceful. Quiet felt suspicious, like the world was holding its breath before it hit you again. You'd hear a door slam, and your body would flinch like it was incoming. Red started smoking more. Doc started sleeping less. Pritchard got quieter than quiet. One evening in June, we sat outside a commandeered building, some old office with chipped stonework. The sun was out, and down the street a couple kids were playing, laughing like the world had always been safe. That sound made my throat tighten. Kids laughing shouldn't feel dangerous, but it did, because it reminded me how much had been stolen from everyone. Red had a letter in his hand, folded and unfolded until the paper looked tired. "She's still there," he said. "Mara?" I asked. He nodded, he tried to smile, and it came out crooked. "She wrote me every month," he said. "Every month, like she knew I'd need it." Doc, sitting on the steps, said quietly, "Somebody needed to believe you were coming back." Red stared at the letter like it was fragile. Then he shoved it in his pocket. He looked at me. "You think we'll be normal again?" I thought about normal, how it used to mean dinner at the table, and a radio on in the background, and a Sunday afternoon that didn't carry weight. "I don't know," I said, "but I think we can learn a new normal." Red laughed once, soft. "That's a depressing pep talk." "It's the best I've got," I told him. Pritchard, cleaning his rifle out of habit, said without looking up, "Normal's overrated." Red squinted. "You got a plan, Sarge?" Pritchard paused for a long moment before answering. "Farm back in Pennsylvania," he said. "Dad's gone, place needs fixing, fences don't care if you're sad." Doc nodded like that made perfect sense. "That sounds good," he said. Pritchard's eyes stayed on the horizon. "Sounds quiet." Quiet, always quiet. A few weeks later, we got rotation orders. We boarded a transport across the Atlantic, packed in with too many men and not enough air, all of us trying to act like we were heading home from a long job instead of crawling out of a nightmare. On the third night, someone dropped a metal cup. The clang snapped through the dark. I jolted awake, heart racing, sweat cold on my back. Across from me, Red was staring at the ceiling. "You too," he whispered. I swallowed, "Yeah." He exhaled. "I keep thinking if I fall asleep, I'll wake up in that ditch again." I didn't know how to fix him. I barely knew how to fix me. So I said the only thing I could say: if you wake up in a ditch, I'll drag you out. Red's eyes shifted toward me. In the dark, I could hear him smile. Yeah, he said, you will. Somewhere nearby, Doc muttered, half asleep, both of you shut up and sleep. And for a moment, it felt almost like peace. When we docked in New York, there were crowds and bands and flags, people cheering like they could cheer the war out of our bones. I stood on the deck staring at the skyline and felt nothing for a second, like my feelings were still overseas. Then it hit me, delayed but heavy. I was back. Not home yet, but back. The Army processed us like it processed everything: forms, lines, stamps. Then one day, it just let go. I took a train back to Indiana wearing my uniform because it was the only suit I owned that fit. The conductor called me "Sir," like the war had upgraded me. When the train pulled into my town, my father stood on the platform stiff as a post. He looked older than I remembered. Not old, just worn in a way that made me angry at time itself. My mother stood next to him, hands clasped, eyes already red. I stepped down and my mother grabbed me like she was afraid I'd disappear. My dad hugged me awkwardly, quick, then stepped back and looked at my face like he was counting parts. "You hungry?" he asked. That was my father, no speeches, no poetry. Just "you hungry?" "Yeah," I said, my voice cracked a little. "Yeah, I'm hungry." That night my mother made stew and I ate like I'd never eaten before. The kitchen light was warm. The chair was solid under me. My dad's fork on the plate sounded like home. Halfway through dinner, a car backfired outside. My hand jerked so fast, I knocked my spoon to the table. Everything went quiet. My mother's eyes widened, but she didn't panic. She reached out and touched my wrist gently like you touch a skittish animal, hopping it remembers you. "It's okay," she said softly, "just a car." I nodded, embarrassed and angry at myself all at once. My dad cleared his throat and said, casual like it mattered, "Town, been full of bad mufflers lately." Then he kept eating, giving me a bridge back to the table without making a big deal out of my shaking. Weeks passed, then months. I went back to the machine shop. Machines made sense. If something was broken, you could see it, you could fix it, you could tighten a bolt and trust it to stay tight. People were harder. At night, sleep came and went like it had its own opinions about me. Some nights were fine. Some nights I woke up sweating, sure I'd heard shouting in German, or I'd dream of hedgerows so tall they blocked out the sky. I learned to sit on the edge of the bed and breathe, until the room became a room again. I learned to stop pretending it wasn't happening. Letters came. Doc wrote first. He wasn't going back to dentistry. He was going to medical school on the GI Bill. He wrote, "I can't go back to fixing teeth after what I've seen. Feels like putting a bandage on the wrong wound." Red wrote next. He found Mara, married her in a small church. His handwriting looked steadier than mine, like love was an anchor. He wrote, "She looks at me like I came back from the dead. Some days I feel like I did." Then months later, Pritchard wrote. The letter was short because that's who he was. He wrote, "Fence is up, roof is patched, quiet still loud sometimes, but it's the right kind of loud. If you're ever driving east, you know where to turn off. Quiet still loud sometimes." That line hit me harder than any speech ever could, because it was the truth, and it was the kind of truth only one man could say to another without shame. Years did what years do. They kept moving. I married, I had kids. The first time I held my son, his hand wrapped around my finger like it belonged there, and I felt something in me unclench that I didn't know was clenched. I thought, this is what I'm for now. But the war never fully left. It just changed clothes. Sometimes it showed up as a smell, diesel fuel on a cold morning. Sometimes as a sound, train whistles at night, dragging me back to aircraft engines. Sometimes it showed up as temper, sharp and sudden, and I'd have to step out into the garage and breathe until I could be a husband again instead of a man still guarding a perimeter. And every year, without fail, my body remembered Normandy. It remembered the night air, the tree bark under my gloves, that cigarette ember glowing under me like the world's smallest sun. Eventually, when life allowed it, we reunited. Early 50s summer, Red drove in with Mara beside him. He gained a little weight, looked healthier. He still had that grin, but it didn't hide as much as it used to. Doc arrived in a suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders right, like his body still expected webbing and straps. He'd become a real doctor, one of those calm men people trust, because he doesn't pretend the world is simple. Pritchard came last, driving an old truck with hay in the back like he'd walked away from his farm for a day and didn't want it to notice. We sat on my back porch with beers sweating in our hands, listening to cicadas and letting the evening settle around us. Mara and my wife went inside after a while, smart women, both of them, leaving the four of us alone with the quiet. We talked about kids, work, weather, safe subjects. Then Red stared into his beer and said softly, "You ever feel guilty being happy?" Doc answered immediately, "Yes." Pritchard didn't say anything, but his jaw tightened. I stared out at the yard and said, "Sometimes happiness feels like stealing." Doc nodded like that was exactly the word. Red rubbed his face, "So what do we do with it?" Pritchard took a slow sip, set the bottle down, and finally spoke. "You live anyway," he said. "That's the deal. You carry them and you live anyway." Nobody argued. Because deep down, we knew that was the only honest ending we were going to get. People ask me now, sometimes, if I felt like a hero. I never know how to answer. Because I did brave things, I did scared things, I did things I'm proud of and things I wish I could rewrite. I survived when better men didn't, and that fact doesn't sit neatly in the chest. It scratches around. What I can tell you, what I can say without lying, is this. When the world fell apart, the men beside me held. Red with his jokes that kept fear from taking over. Doc with his stubborn refusal to look away from suffering. Pritchard steady as a fence post in a storm, trying to keep us from becoming smaller. And me, just a guy from Indiana, trying not to sneeze in a tree, trying to keep moving forward one decision at a time. If there's any heroism in that, it isn't the loud kind. It's the quiet kind. The kind that says, in mud and cold and fear, "I'm going to stand up anyway. I'm going to pull you back anyway. I'm going to stay human anyway." That's the full history as I remember it. Not the whole war. Nobody can hold that much in one head. Just my slice of it. The slice that still tastes like smoke sometimes. And stew if I'm lucky.